Learning English from scratch, I mean, can be pretty intimidating.
It can feel like you're facing this massive wall of words and grammar rules.
Right. It's like, where do you even start?
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Okay, cool.
We found this really interesting podcast episode, How to Start Learning English from Zero.
Okay, so starting from the very beginning.
Yeah, and it had some surprising tips, honestly.
Oh, really? Like what?
And one of the biggest is shifting your mindset.
Okay, interesting.
So instead of thinking of English as difficult, think of it as just new.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
The host of the podcast even had this analogy. They said it's like trying a new food for the first time.
Okay.
You might not like it at first, but you got to give it a chance.
I like that.
Yeah.
That takes the pressure off a bit.
Exactly.
So if we're not jumping into grammar textbooks right away, what should we be doing?
Well, they actually suggest starting with listening.
Really? Before grammar rules and all that.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
Just immerse yourself, bathe yourself in the sounds of the language.
Okay.
They use this analogy of a baby. You know how babies learn to speak.
Yeah.
They don't start with grammar books.
Yeah.
They just listen to the world around them. And their brains are kind of wired to just naturally pick up on those patterns.
That's so fascinating. So would that be like watching movies with subtitles or...
Actually, hold off on subtitles at first.
Right.
Yeah, just focus on getting used to the sounds.
Okay.
So you can start with really simple stuff like cartoons.
Okay.
Or podcasts that are specifically for English learners, those slow ones.
Right.
Or even some beginner-friendly YouTube videos. There's tons out there.
Yeah, there are a lot. Okay.
And then after you've listened for a few days, then you can add the subtitles in to, reinforce what you're hearing.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about speaking?
Yeah.
I know a lot of new learners are terrified to actually speak.
Oh, totally. It's a really common fear. And that episode talks about that directly.
Okay, good.
They say the key is to remember that perfection is not the goal here.
Right.
Especially when you're just starting out.
Yeah. But how do you get over that fear of sounding silly?
Well, they actually recommend 3 techniques.
Okay.
One is called shadowing.
Shadowing.
Yeah. You basically mimic a native speaker.
Okay.
So you listen to a sentence.
Yeah.
And you try to repeat it as accurately as you can. Like you're paying attention to their pronunciation, their intonation, all of that.
So like an English parrot.
Exactly. And it's a great way to train your mouth to make those new sounds that you're not used to.
Yeah. Okay. What was the second one?
The second one's talking to yourself.
Well, I do that already.
Perfect. So you're halfway there.
But in my own language.
Right. But just start incorporating some English into it. Describe what you're doing as you're doing it. Even simple stuff like I'm making breakfast or I'm going for a walk. It's just about getting comfortable with actually producing those sounds.
Okay. And the third one?
The third one is using AI tools or language learning apps.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, you see ads for those everywhere.
All the time. Do they work?
They can be helpful, yeah. Especially for practicing vocabulary and basic grammar.
Okay.
The key is to find one that you like, that aligns with your learning style, and that keeps you engaged,
Right.
And remember, mistakes are going to happen.
Oh, for sure. For me, a lot of mistakes.
That's good. That's actually a good thing.
Really?
Yeah, you got to view those mistakes as feedback, not as failures.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, they're helping you pinpoint the areas where you need to focus.
Okay.
The podcast host actually had this great quote, "Embrace your mistakes. They're proof that you're learning."
I love that. So what about vocabulary? Because that's another thing that can feel really overwhelming.
Yeah, it can.
Do you have to memorize a dictionary or something?
Well, actually, the episode suggests focusing on learning practical phrases instead of just isolated words.
Oh, okay.
So think about it. You're more likely to use the phrase, "Can you help me?" than just the word help on its own.
That's true. That's really practical.
Yeah. And by learning these phrases, you'll naturally start absorbing those grammar structures as well.
Oh, cool. Sneaky, sneaky.
Exactly. They even suggest starting with phrases like, "I don't understand, where's the bathroom?" And "How much does this cost?"
That's so helpful.
Yeah, really useful stuff.
Okay, so we've got listening, we've got speaking, we've got phrases. What about reading? Where does that fit in?
Reading's definitely important.
Okay.
But start simple. You don't need to jump into Shakespeare right away.
Oh, thank goodness.
Start with children's books.
Okay.
Or there are these things called graded readers, which are basically books that are written specifically for English language learners.
Oh, okay, cool.
The language is more straightforward,
Yeah.
and the sentence structures are simpler.
Okay.
And don't forget about flashcards.
Oh, yeah, flashcards, yeah.
Those can be a great tool for reinforcing vocabulary.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some good apps for that?
There are some really good apps out there that use a technique called spaced repetition.
Space repetition.
Yeah,
What's that?
it's basically, it shows you a word, and then it quizzes you on it again later, and
Yeah.
then again even later, spacing out the repetitions,
Okay.
which helps it stick in your memory better.
That sounds really smart. So what about, we always hear that you need to know like 10,000 words to be fluent.
Oh yeah, that's actually a myth.
Is it?
Yeah, the podcast actually debunks that.
Good.
They talk about this thing called the 80-20 rule.
Okay, what's that?
It says that about 1,000 words cover like 80% of everyday conversations.
Wait, seriously? Only 1,000?
Yeah. So don't get bogged down like trying to learn every word in the dictionary.
Okay.
Just focus on mastering those core 1,000, and you'll be surprised how much you can understand and say.
Wow, that is amazing. I'm already feeling a lot better about this. So is there like one piece of advice that ties all this together?
Yeah, the episode really stresses the importance of consistency.
Okay. So it's not about cramming like once a week for hours at a time. It's about making it a regular part of your life.
Exactly. Even just 10 minutes of practice every day is more effective than like longer, infrequent study sessions.
Oh, wow.
And they even give like a little sample daily plan.
Oh, what is it?
10 minutes of listening,
Okay.
reading a short story,
Okay.
speaking 5 sentences out loud,
All right.
and learning 5 new words.
That sounds very doable.
Yeah. It's really encouraging to hear that even those small steps can make a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here, but I feel like there's always more to learn when it comes to this. So we'll be back in just a bit with a few more tips to help you on your English learning journey. So stay tuned.
Okay, so we're back and ready to, kind of keep unpacking all these strategies for learning English. It's funny, I'm finding all this advice really helpful, even though I'm not learning English as a second language.
Yeah, that's the thing about these like fundamental principles, right? They can really apply to like learning anything new.
Yeah, that's true. But, motivation, that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Like, how do you stay engaged in the process? Because I know for me, like, if something starts to feel like a chore, I'm way less likely to stick with it.
Right. Well, one of the things they talked about in the episode was connecting your English learning with your passions.
Oh, okay. So instead of just like rote memorization, actually finding ways to use English to do things you already love.
Exactly. So like if you're a movie buff, start watching English language films.
Okay, yeah. Even with subtitles, or maybe read some film reviews in English.
Right, right.
If you're really into cooking, maybe start exploring some English language recipe websites.
Okay.
Or watching cooking shows in English.
Yeah.
So you're picking up new vocabulary, but you're also doing something you actually enjoy.
I love that. It's like sneaking in those vegetables,
Make it sad.
You get all the goodness without even realizing it.
Right. And kind of building on that idea of making it enjoyable, the podcast also emphasized the importance of finding a community.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
Like having a support system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whether it's online or a local language exchange group or even just a friend who's learning English too, having that sense of connection, shared experience can make a huge difference.
It's like having your own personal cheering section.
Totally. And you can, learn from each other, share resources, celebrate each other's successes.
Yes.
Which is so important, celebrating those successes no matter how small.
It's so easy to get caught up in what you don't know and forget how far you've come.
Right. So maybe you finally nailed that grammar rule, or you were able to have like a basic conversation with a native speaker without completely freezing up.
Right, right.
Those are big wins,
Yeah, they are.
Celebrate those.
Yeah, even if it's just like buying yourself a coffee.
Exactly.
Or watching an extra episode of your favorite show. Whatever it is that makes you happy.
Yeah, it reinforces those positive feelings.
Yeah, totally. So, we've talked about mindset, we've talked about practical strategies, we've talked about staying motivated. Anything else that like really stood out to you from this episode?
One thing that that resonated with me, I think, is because I tend to be pretty impatient when it comes to learning new things,
Yeah, me too.
I want to see results quickly.
Yeah.
And if I don't, I can get discouraged pretty easily.
Yeah.
And this actually leads perfectly into the last big takeaway from the podcast, which is the importance of patience. They actually said, learning a language is like growing a garden.
Okay.
You plant the seeds, you water them consistently, and then you have to be patient and wait for them to sprout and blossom.
I love that.
Yeah, you have to give yourself that time and space to grow.
Right, right. And know that, those consistent efforts are going to pay off eventually.
Exactly. And there are going to be days when you feel like you're making amazing progress,
Yeah.
and there are going to be days where you feel stuck.
Oh, yeah.
It's totally normal.
It's like anything worth doing takes time.
It's a process.
Yeah, it's a process.
Yeah,
But I think having those realistic expectations from the start is so important.
absolutely. And that's why it's okay to make those mistakes. It's okay to have those off days. You don't have to be perfect.
Yeah.
The key is to keep going.
Keep practicing.
Keep believing in yourself.
So true. So true. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, but I feel like there's always more to learn.
Well, you're in luck because we actually have one more part to this deep dive.
Oh, fantastic.
So we'll be right back with a few final nuggets of wisdom to help you on your English learning journey. All right, so we are back for the final part of our deep dive into learning English from scratch. It's been a pretty fascinating conversation so far.
It really has. It's amazing how much, we've been able to kind of pull out of just this one podcast episode.
It really is. We've talked about mindset, practical strategies, staying motivated, but before we wrap things up, are there any final pieces of advice from the episode we haven't touched on yet?
There's one more important point that I think is really worth highlighting, and that's the importance of setting realistic goals.
Oh, yeah. Goals are so important
Right.
because it's easy to feel overwhelmed if you set the bar too high. Right?
Exactly, yeah. So instead of aiming for fluency within a few months, start with smaller, more achievable milestones.
Right.
Like maybe it's being able to introduce yourself or order food at a restaurant or understand the main points of like a simple news article. Yeah, those are great examples. It's like, breaking down that climb to the summit of Mount Everest into smaller, more manageable base camps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And each time you reach one of those milestones, you gain that confidence, that motivation,
Right, yeah.
and it propels you forward.
So it's less about, feeling discouraged by how far you have to go and more about celebrating those little victories along the way.
Exactly. Yeah. And that sense of accomplishment will fuel your desire to keep learning.
I love that. So once you have those realistic goals in place, what's the best way to, actually make progress toward them? I imagine consistency is key.
Absolutely. Yeah, the episode, they talk a lot about creating that consistent study routine.
So it's not just about, squeezing in a few minutes here and there whenever you remember.
Right, yeah. It's about making English a regular part of your day, just like, brushing your teeth or having breakfast.
Right, right. So how do you actually go about establishing that kind of routine? Any tips from the episode?
Well, they recommend finding a specific time and place for your English practice that works for you.
Okay.
And sticking to it as much as possible. So maybe it's like 30 minutes before bed or an hour during your lunch break or even 15 minutes on your commute.
Yeah, yeah. So it's all about fitting it into your life, right? There's no one size fits all.
Exactly. And the key is just to be consistent.
Yeah.
Once you've chosen that time and place, try to stick to it as closely as you can. Make it non-negotiable.
Yeah, it's like that appointment with yourself, right?
Exactly.
The English appointment. And I imagine the environment you're in matters too, right? Like maybe not studying in bed if you're prone to falling asleep.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, they talk about finding like a dedicated study space that's free from distractions. So it could be a quiet corner in your home, the library, even like a coffee shop.
Yeah.
The key is just creating that environment where you can really focus.
Yeah, where you can really get into it. So before we wrap up, are there any final words of wisdom from the episode that you want to leave our listeners with?
Yes. The last thing I wanted to mention, and I think this is really important, is to don't be afraid to experiment and find what works best for you.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah, because there's so many different resources out there, so many different methods. Don't feel like you have to stick to just one approach.
Exactly. Maybe you're a visual learner who loves flashcards, or maybe you learn best through music and movies, or maybe you're someone who really thrives in those, real-life interactive conversations. Just be open to trying different things and seeing what clicks for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really empowering message. It's like, you can really personalize it and make it your own.
Exactly.
Well, I think we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. It's amazing what we were able to get out of just one podcast episode. And I think the most important takeaway for me is that learning English really doesn't have to be daunting or overwhelming.
Yeah, I agree. With the right mindset, strategies, and a commitment to consistency, anyone can make progress.
And who knows, maybe this episode will inspire someone out there to take that first step on their English learning journey.
I hope so. I mean, learning a new language, it opens up a whole new world of possibilities. It allows you to connect with different people, explore new ideas, and, just expand your horizons in ways you never thought possible.
Well, beautifully said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this episode. A huge thank you to our expert for guiding us through this deep dive. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We hope you found this exploration insightful and inspiring.
The pleasure was all mine. And just remember, the most important thing is to enjoy the journey.
Absolutely. Until next time, happy learning.